Hi, this is Phil, and I'm here to make sure you know all about the Capes and Lunatics Patreon. Don't miss out on all new episodes of Wade's World, Boob Windows and Long Boxes, our Hard R movie reviews, and so much more, all completely uncensored. Access starts for as little as $1 a month, full videos when you pledge $3 a month. Check us out at the link in all of our show notes, or just go straight to patreon.com/capesandlunatics. Hope to see you there. Hello everyone, welcome back to another, well, we're not talking Daredevil, so I don't think this could be on our Daredevil show, so, this is probably the first official Chichester Chat.
Oh, God.
You're like, I know that guy.
You better throw a TM after that, so you hold on to it.
Thought I'd have to wrestle you for that. That's right, kids. Mr. DG Chichester is back. Thank you for joining us again.
Absolutely, Phil Lilith. Always a fun way to start my Saturday.
And this time we're talking, of course, I figured the synergy might be nice, so we're talking his Punisher Black Widow spinning Doomsday's web story from 1992.
Oh my God. Ahead of its time.
1992 and the word Doomsday. I don't know, man.
I don't know. Not compared to 2020, but maybe in 92 it felt like the right thing.
Oh,
have you guys seen the movie?
Yes. Yeah, did you see it?
In the theater? At home? What did you choose?
I saw it in the theater.
Lilith?
At home projector screen.
At home projector screen. So yeah, we went with the we debated, but we ended up going with the at-home, moderately sized screen. But it was, I'm sure it would have really filled the big screen. But a really good time. I'm sure we'll talk about that.
Did you? Did you like the movie? Did you like the movie?
Oh yeah. No, I mean, I'm thinking how we might talk about it today. I think there's so many different levels to think about it. Because it's been coming out forever. Right. So you've got like a level of expectation around what is it? You're thinking, we were so used to Marvel movies being both kind of self-standing, but also sort of building on each other. So what does it do there? It's a weird movie where it's, what's it going to add to the bigger story around her? And sort of how you take away things from that, or how I took away things from that. And then I think just as a generally an action movie, but I think it delivers on most of those things in a really good way. It was thoroughly enjoyable, but also a little bit bittersweet because you're like, I guess we're not seeing her anymore.
I don't know. Soul Stones and all. I don't know.
It's true. Exactly. And then you watch the last episode of Loki a week later, and you're like, I have no idea anymore.
That's where they want you.
Exactly.
I just always think, they kill off Robert Downey Jr. and Scarlett Johansson because they're like, oh, they're making the biggest paychecks. We could hire two people for what we're getting, paying them. Oh,
possibly. I mean, although I'm sure Downey, contract at some point said, you kill me when I say you kill me.
No, true.
And for whatever they were paying him, it was infinitely worth it in terms of his appeal. And it's funny if you ever watch those, and you go down that YouTube rabbit hole and you watch the YouTube reaction videos of how people react in the theaters, right? React to when she jumps off the cliff or falls off the cliff, or reacts when he snaps his fingers, and you just understand how much appreciation over 10 years people built up in these characters that 10 years before the three of us knew who they were, but the general public had no idea who Tony Stark was, no idea who Black Widow was. These were not pantheon characters. And the fact that people reacted, so emotionally, positively and really upset, that they're gone is a real testament to those performances.
Oh yeah, for sure. Okay, so we'll get to your story, the Punisher Black Widow. It was a one shot, so I'm always curious about this. Did they come to you with this assignment, or were you like, oh, hey, I have a story? Because I mean, you wrote Nick Fury at this point, so.
Yeah, I have to imagine, and I was thinking about this, and I wrote about this in my newsletter because I was also trying to take advantage of the proximity to the movie. But that was one of the last, if not the last, large format graphic novels, right? The original graphic novel format was this oversized, almost like, clipboard sized comic, or really weird format. It was designed, I remember, kind of specifically to stand out more, but then it also wouldn't fit on a shelf very well. It was probably more expensive to produce. But it feels in my half memory that it was something that Marvel wanted to do. They had sort of planned, we wanted to do a graphic novel. We wanted to team up Punisher and Black Widow. And it was kind of an assignment that was brought to me. And it was probably brought to me because I was playing in the espionage world. I was playing with Nick Fury. And it started with Greg Wright, who was my friend, but was also always going to pick who he thought was the best team. I never got anything from Greg based on just friendship. I got it because he said, "You're pretty good at this. You would do this." He's very judgmental. Would be a harsh way of saying it, but I can't think of a better way of saying it. He's not just going to hand you an assignment. So I think the Fury stuff and Marvel would do this sometimes, and I'm sure still does it, where they would just say, "We want to put these characters together to highlight Black Widow more, put a Punisher in a story. You're going to highlight the character." It's a way to keep refreshing things. And so a graphic novel is scheduled. We've got to fill a slot for the sales. We're going to put these characters together. Now find a creative team and go figure it out. So once I had the assignment, it was up to me to figure out what to do with it. There was no you've got to put them in this situation or use this type of technology or any of that sort of stuff. So it was free reign after that.
Yeah, I mean, unlike your other stuff, this was the first time I'd actually read this. And I was like, okay,
Oh,
yeah, this is the first time I read this. And
First time I read it, too.
I hope you liked it. But yeah, 1992, I thought, okay, the Punisher's going to dominate this story because, how popular is the Punisher at this point. And yeah, no, I was pleasantly surprised. I was like, oh, this is a Black Widow story. This isn't like a Punisher story where she just like shows up. Yeah, I was very pleased about that.
well, yeah, I think a lot of people were kind of expecting that because at the time, didn't Punisher have more like graphic novels out? Like that was a thing. I know a lot of people that collect the like Punisher graphic novels. They say that about this issue.
It's definitely, there was definitely a Punisher machine running at one point or another around this time. There was a Punisher machine, there was a Ghost Rider machine, there was an X-Men machine, Spider-Man machine, and especially I think in terms of Punisher and to an extent Ghost Rider, because of the popularity, everybody, Venom, would slug these characters in or try to slug these characters in. If the editor who owned the character reined it back in, because it would say, we're getting this overused, it would be too much. But Punisher was definitely that sort of spotlight machine, right? You want to boost it a little bit, bring him in. So, when you say that, Phil, it makes me rethink it a little bit and wonder, was this a Black Widow graphic novel that they were just doing? And then maybe in the thinking, we said, you know what? We'll bring in Punisher, but we'll bring him in a semi-logical way, but it'll help boost the sales as well. Because we were thinking that not in a terrible way, but you're always thinking that. You're always trying to say, we want more attention on this book. But it definitely is a Black Widow story first.
Oh yeah,
and he becomes a sidekick, an interesting add to the story for his own reasons, and even the in rereading it, in preparation, for this, even the way it's written, it's all her internal dialogue, but then it goes into this one step removed third person when it's got his standalone scenes.
So
I think it helps Punisher. It takes the brunt of the load off of him so he can just shine and be competent. Like it's not all mercy bullets and
yeah. And I always try to treat the Punisher as a character. Some people treat him like as a killing machine. Some treated him very, really in depth in his character. Chuck Dixon always comes to mind, for me as somebody who really got in there and dug in and he worked on the character extensively. So you'd imagine, that would happen. But to me, why is he doing this is obvious. His family's killed, so he's on this revenge thing. But how do you balance that out? What else does he bring to the story aside from just guns and a interesting costume?
But yeah, I think we've with three of us have discussed it before. Like, a lot of times the Punisher looks even better when he's teamed up with someone, either like Spider-Man or Daredevil. But I mean, it's interesting too when you team him up with like Black Widow here, or even like a Moon Knight, people who have like killed in the past, and you kind of like throw a mirror up, and it's like Frank gets to see how other people deal with that, having killed in the past, and maybe turn it around.
And she's very gray in the story. In terms of her moral choices and quandaries and how far she has to go. And he is, of course, very ruthless. Even there's one scene, right, where it's like, well, you're just standing next to the guy, so you must be guilty too. And so it just becomes this, but it works. To me, it works in the sense of just trying to activate those parts of him. And then he has to, of course, team up with her and then deal with certain things along the way.
So did you say was there a push to do more stuff with Black Widow? Because I was trying to think of anything they did with her in the 90s. And the only thing I can think of is like, when Captain America left the Avengers, they kind of made her the team leader of the Avengers for a few years there.
Not that I was directly involved in, but as I said, it doesn't strike me as, I can remember definitively pitching the Punisher Captain America series. I can remember definitively pitching, this book or that book. This one doesn't spring to mind as something I went in to pitch. And so it feels more like, hey, we're doing a graphic novel with Black Widow. Do you want to write it? And that sort of cycling through of certain characters, might have been an editorial choice. I'm just spinning maybes here, but a graphic novel might have been assigned to Greg's office, and Greg didn't ultimately release it. It went through like Nel Yontov at one point, but he might have had a graphic novel assigned to his office, and Greg liked the Black Widow, so he said, we're going to make a Black Widow story out of it. And then from an editorial point of view, Tom DeFalco or whomever says, yeah, sure, that sounds good. And you didn't pick some really fringe character. Widow's got some, qualities to her. And then you're kind of off to the races. So she's not the most prominent character, but neither is she the most obscure character that somebody would just say, no, we're not going to get anything out of that.
So how do editors choose, if they get several projects at the same time, several graphic novels like this one, was it like, okay, the Punisher's popular, I think he's had 3 monthly books at this point, and you're
at least
graphic novel. Yeah. So did that help greenlight this, and get it in front of a few other things? It's okay, the Punisher's in here. Let's.
Absolutely. And we would always play, prominence games, I guess, with the sales department, because the sales department would also help make decisions around certain things. So if you went in and you were saying we're going to do obscure character X or even a Black Widow, they would be maybe I kind of like the Widow as a reader, but I'm not quite sure about fans. But then you say, oh no, she teams up with the Punisher. That would be the boost, right? And clearly, even the way it's sort of framed, Punisher, Black Widow, the prominence of him, on the cover, the back cover copy. All these things play out both. He's got his due in the story, but as when you read it, it's very much a Black Widow story that the Punisher becomes a part of. But I think that's the way that editors, and then if you've got a dialogue, you're trying to, it sounds very mechanical and cold when you say, oh, well, we're going to put the Punisher in here to boost the sales. You want the sales. You want... Yeah. And you want
eyes on your book, yeah.
Yeah, you're telling a story, you want people to read it, right? And so there are certain machineries that you want to sort of put in function for the benefit of that.
Yeah, I think she shines. I like the story a lot. I love the artwork too. I love when Black Widow has her short, fiery red hair. That is just chef's kiss look for me.
Yeah. Oh yeah, Larry does a lot of great stuff with it. He has there's one problem I've always I've always had an issue with, but he does a lot of great stuff. He's got a very dynamic
pin-up style, so it speaks to me.
Yeah, no, but it's very, very dynamic. The lines are very energetic across the page, across the characters. Carries a lot of energy.
Makes the fight scenes amazing. I really enjoy the fight scenes.
That was another pleasant surprise, is Larry Stroman's art. Because I liked his work in X Factor in the 90s, so I was like, it's Larry Stroman. Yeah, it's been a while. So that was like the icing on the cake. Yeah.
And the physicality of it, there's a couple scenes where, basically big scenes where Widow and Malum, the main, the bad guy, are kind of going at it, and there's a real that guy is a bull in the way that Larry sort of really brought him forward, and it really just feels like if he connects with her, you can understand why she would be thrown off her game because of that sense of physical presence he brings to it.
I think the format of the book really helps. I love this, like the splash page. You could just kind of go bananas. That was great. Did
you see the original one, Lilith, or did you read it?
I have the original one.
You have the original one. Yeah, you're right. And that was a kind of, because I reread it I have the original somewhere, I hope. But I reread it in one of the collections, which shrinks everything down, which it's still the story, but you're right. When it's that bigger thing, it does have a cool effect to it.
It like pulls you in. I kind of miss that format, not gonna lie. I know it's not very functional for collectors, but it does like pull you into the story quite literally. I think that might have been a choice. Besides just standing out, it just like allows you to immerse yourself a little more than
absolutely. The format was definitely that's going to pull you in and really make an impact with visuals like that.
And it's probably not the best for the art also, but I mean, I did read this on Marvel Unlimited, so it is on there also.
Oh, okay. So even potentially smaller.
Depending on your device. On, but yeah.
The thing about the graphic novels is even though it's smaller, they do tend to preserve the coloring. I've noticed specifically for that. I don't know how they do it, but the coloring is really good, and you don't really lose much of that.
Right.
There's a lot of coloring and lines you can lose when it gets compressed and stuff, and it kind of does change your feelings a little bit sometimes.
Yeah, some of it's automated, much of it's automated, I'm sure, but I'm sure there's got to be a quality control person who's sort of holding it up against the original and saying, do we need to adjust the lines, the color? And sometimes when you see those scans, because it's certainly not pulling most things from the original film, I'm sure they're pulling it from scan of the comics. So it's got to be somebody who's putting a little TLC into it.
Were you ever tempted to, as the Daredevil writer, to put Daredevil in this, or would that have been too many characters? Could Black have potentially got lost?
He stuck Nick in there.
Yeah. Nick was right. It's
Nick Fury.
When you reread these things, at least for me, I can reconnect to some degree with whatever the influences were at the time. Of the world, of what I was interested in from a storytelling point of view. But I think one thing I've been sort of true to over the years as I worked on these things is who makes sense and who doesn't, and who are you shoehorning in, right? And so Fury makes complete sense. Fury makes complete sense because of the espionage aspect of it.
And her complicated history with S.H.I.E.L.D., which is an ongoing thing.
Exactly. And also he becomes a foil for her to work through her issues. I decided to introduce this whole complex, or at least, back and forth in her head of what am I doing? How far am I going? How do you deal with life and death? How do you make the choices that you're making? And Fury becomes a manipulator, which he always is in my mind, but he also,
well, obviously he's good at his job. You have to remember, he's also in the espionage game.
But becomes that whole life and death thing at the end, or why do you smoke the cigars? That sort of thing. It becomes a play of well, I want to think about death all the time. So Daredevil wouldn't have fit here. So I can't imagine that ever crossed my mind. And it's a relatively tight story for this end of the world device that they're kind of playing with. It's a relatively tight espionage story of what's going on. We're trying to figure out what it is, and we're trying to track this guy down. So I think, what is it? It's like 42 pages, 48 pages at most. Yeah. So, a side trip to New York and Hell's Kitchen and hanging out and water towers, wasn't in the cards.
I mean, it works. It blends in, but I was just laughing when she was like disguised. She has a little fake mustache.
Oh, I know.
Little sailor, little mustache.
I know, the sailor's got the mustache.
Yeah, Larry obviously had fun with that one too. But but yeah, it's who knows why I made that choice. That was.
So is it different plotting and scripting a graphic novel versus just a regular comic book?
Not so much. I mean, a story like that's a story like that. You're the thing you're aiming for with that type of format is a page count, right? So now you're going bigger. Once you start to go bigger beyond what was at that point, what are comics nowadays, like 20 pages? So at that point, there were 22 pages was the standard. So, wow, suddenly I've got more space. I think what I always found, and I think a lot of people found, is then suddenly you'd end up writing a 52-page story because you suddenly let yourself off the leash, or a 60-page story, and then you had to rein yourself back in. So that was the thing. How do you make sure that you're trying to now use that extra space to good effect? And I know I definitely opened it up. And probably once I knew Larry was on it, I opened up certain things a little bit more to give, more space for visuals. And some of his strengths, as you said, were pinup shots. So I knew he would appreciate a couple of big opportunities for, here's Punisher and Black Widow in action, that type of thing. Play to an artist's strengths is, in my mind, always one of the things you want to do as a writer, to figure out what do they like to do, what are they really good at, and makes them happy and makes their job more enjoyable. Then here's what I like to do as a writer. I like to have a bunch of people sitting around talking, and I bet you the artist's going to love me for that. Or I like giant space battles with 4,000 ships. Bet the artist's going to love me for that.
Is that always floating in your head? It's like, do I really need to put 4,000 ships in this panel?
Oh, for me, from both an editor and a writer point of view, and trying to have been friendly with artists over the years, that's always top of mind. I mean, you'll make enemies quick, and people might. So many people are just professionals, right? They'll go in and say, "Oh God, all right," and ship 1, ship 2, ship 3, but you're not going to, probably never going to work with that person again, because they're going to hear your name and they're going to want to run in another direction. But it's always better, I think, to pick the things that they're going to really, really enjoy. Years ago, I did a book, a couple of Nightbreed issues with Mark Nelson, and Mark loves monsters. Mark absolutely loves monsters and loves monstrous monsters, more than humanoid monsters, in a lot of ways. And so we particularly crafted a Nightbreed story that was less about the humanoid Nightbreed and humans than it was about these gigantic beastie things. And he just fell in love with that.
I mean, so I don't know if you ever worked like this. I heard an interview with the team on the current Spider-Woman book, Carla Pacheco and Perez, and I think she said she always she's in constant communication with her artist, and she always asks him, what do you want to draw? I'll try to work it in an issue. You want monster trucks? Do you want dinosaurs? I'll find a way to work them in. So.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that was always something I would try to do. I think where I would stumble is when I didn't have enough of those conversations. And I think even the part of this book where, like I said, I think Larry did one thing that I've never been happy with in terms of the visualization on something, but I think that's on me for not having been in contact with Larry enough throughout. This book actually went through kind of again, I've got half a set of neurons that have all the best specific memories of it, but I think this was like a long way around. Like this wasn't written at the beginning of October and then released at the end of November. This to me strikes me as something that was written, kind of went into a long holding pattern, and then because by the time it came out, it was in Neil Yomtov's office. So Greg would have left staff, and so I think it became less that I was attached to it directly at certain points than, oh, it's in motion somewhere, as opposed to Daredevil, where I was talking to Lee every day. I was talking to Scott every day. Those sort of things where you have much more direct relationships with people, and you're really, as you said, the Spider-Woman example, playing out what do you like to draw? I can't believe what you actually put on this page. I'm so excited for it, because as an editor and a writer, you're not blowing smoke at people, but you're recognizing that everybody wants to hear feedback. When I was an editor, there was one artist in particular, well, I'm not going to name, but a fabulous artist. But if he would come in with pages for something, and you were just like, oh, thanks. You were busy, you're in the middle of something, you took the pages, and I'll look at these later. You wouldn't see that guy again for 4 weeks. But if you took the time to look at it and give immediate feedback and say, this is amazing, right? I can't believe what you did here. Look at what you added to the story. You'd have the whole book the next day, right? Because that person would be so jazzed up. And again, you're not blowing smoke. If there's problems, you're going to identify problems. But if you're giving people feedback, it's human. It makes you more excited to continue to do the work.
So what you're saying is the graphic novel is better than the monthly book, just because you have more lead time, and don't have to be like, okay, we need this exactly right here, right? Just
definitely. Definitely. I mean, some graphic novels obviously were on certain schedules. I think what killed part of the this format, that graphic novel format, was a lot of those were originally done as contracts too. So they were offered as contract deals, and they had such long lead time that they fell into black holes, right? Some of these things, the contract might have been written in 89. The book might not have come out until 92. This wasn't one of them, but I mean, it had that sort of thing. But that could also, Phil, be I think a detriment, which again, half my memory says with this one, it was written as a plot. And then it was sort of like, okay, it's in the editorial office. I wonder what's happening with that, because I was off doing other things, and I might check back in occasionally, but I was on to other things. And I figure, okay, editorial's got this, Larry's got this. I don't know what the schedule is, but by the time it looped back around into Nell's office, and Nell has no history with it, and then some certain story problems or other things, become sort of confusing to him, and then suddenly it's a rush to get it out, because this thing was sitting around for such a long time, for whatever reason. Now it becomes a different type of priority. So we had lots of lead time, but it got tricky, as I recall, a little bit toward the end.
Was there talk at this point of maybe doing a Black Widow books? I know wasn't Marvel like spinning out a lot of stuff? And again, at this point, she's connected to Daredevil, Nick Fury. Hey, she worked with the Punisher here, so it's like, really?
Yeah, no, I mean, that would have been a great idea and a great, smart thing for me to play out. But I didn't, and there wasn't any real conversation around that, to my knowledge. I think probably if this hadn't been that long way around sort of story, if I'd written it in October and man, it's ready to come out by November or whatever, or December, there would have been that bigger feeling of momentum behind it. And maybe a sense for me to kind of go in and play out, I should pitch a Black Widow miniseries, or I should pitch a Black Widow series and see where that's going to go. But I was relatively busy at that time, probably with a few different things going at once. So it didn't feel like adding one more thing that wasn't a side project, a standalone project, might have made sense. Not that stopped me before. I did lots of things that made no sense. So.
Because, I mean, nothing against the character, but I mean, back in the 90s, we got a Silver Sable series for 35. She got 35 issues. If Silver Sable can hold 35, I think Black Widow could have.
Absolutely, 50, yeah. And that was one of Greg Wright's book, and he did a great job and expanded that universe, of her characters and what is what is she and how does she act and how, and he gave her a whole supporting cast, right? It was Silver Sable and the Wild Pack, right? And that was, and the Wild Pack became in some ways as important as Sable did. And you're absolutely right. That would have been a thing to do with Widow and play out, well, who are all her contacts? Who are her, Bartons and other backstory bits that hadn't been played out, and who's her history with, I do a completely throwaway bit where, when she's on the Russian ship and she's sort of, I pulled some strings and made some contacts with old, people from my days with the KGB or the Russian Navy or something like that. But there's a world of people and characters that you could collect around her and made interesting. And maybe I'll call Tom Brevoort after this and say, why don't we do a Black Widow series? But I'm sure they've got like four in development. But sometimes Phil, it was, there were heady days at that point in time. Like when there were so many things coming out, and a lot of them were mutants and spiders and such like that. So, that was also generally a priority with a lot of the publishing choices.
I mean, just as a fan of his Daredevil work, I would have picked up a Black Widow series by Mr. D.G. Chichester back then.
I would have too, yeah. And it's just,
I love that guy. He's great.
Yeah, man, this is really good. I should write more like him. Wait a minute. I think it's funny. Like, why didn't I think of it at that time? I can only imagine. Just like I said, there's so many other things going on that it just didn't ping in my brain to try to leverage that as opposed to leveraging other things.
Not enough hours in the day, I guess.
Yeah, and I also and in fairness, to myself, I was insanely young in comparison to things, and also that weird combination of utter hubris. I know exactly what I'm doing, and don't you dare tell me how to tell a story or change this. And also utter and complete imposter syndrome of like, how did I get here? They're going to find out any minute now I can't write. And I better not poke the bear and try to, open things up. Danny Fingeroth, who was the editor of the Spider-Man books, and I had a good relationship. And Danny was always like, yeah, if you ever got an idea, come by and pitch me, for Spider-Man. And I was just too overwhelmed to think of, if Aunt Danny had offered me a Spider-Man book and said, I want to do a miniseries and I want you to write it, I would have been all over it. Right. And I would have done, I think, a decent job. But to go in and pitch Danny on Spider-Man felt as much even though I was doing other Marvel characters was like, I can't go down to Danny's office. I want to have a good idea. What if he says no? How will I feel? Like, this is the awful human condition. Black Widow wrestles with like life and death. I wrestle with like, can I write a full sentence?
I mean, you did a great job with that Spider-Man story in Daredevil. Was Spider-Man the one character where you're like, okay, I can write the rest of these, but if they offer me a monthly Spider-Man book, I'm just going to be all nerves and just like,
it's like I said, it's that combination of weird mix. I can remember it. I don't want to be that person ever again, but I can remember him, who was so arrogant, as I said, with I know how to tell a story. I know what I'm doing. I'm going to go my own way on this, but also being that I think we all wrestle with that to one extent or another. And at certain points, hopefully you get to the place of, you know what, I'm just going to do it my own way. And I'm going to be comfortable with that. And if you guys love it, that's great. But if not, then, well, I'm not going to bend myself into, weird things to try to make it fit something I can't do or it's not meant to be.
And I know you were doing editorial too, but it's like at the height, like the biggest number, how many monthly books were you doing the most of at one time? Like how many?
I think probably 4 was probably around the most I was doing. And then maybe one like side project like this. And like a lot of, some freelancers are amazingly disciplined, and some freelancers have no discipline at all, and I probably fell somewhere, in between there. And so there'd be days where I would let the time go by, but then when I wanted to do something, I could buckle down and plot out 5 issues of something overnight, and good issues of something overnight. And then you have to the way I write and the way I still write comics this way is when I say I plotted them, I use like yellow legal sheets, and I would pulse out each visual beat in my mind. So it would be, door opens, this happens, that happens. And then you have to go back and write it. You actually now turn that into the descriptions for the artist. But so when I say I plotted it out, that was, I knew where the stories were going to go. So I could be very, very fast and then be more editorial as I went back through and wrote out the plot or the script. Then I could embellish it and correct things as I went along.
Could you do multiple? Go ahead, Lilith. I keep stepping on you. No, go ahead.
So, why did you decide to make this so high stakes with like a nuclear device? Was that like demanded of you, or is that just something you wanted to do with the story?
Yeah, no, thank you for asking that. That's a great question. I think there's 2 things. I was weirdly obsessed with nuclear power at that point. It was just like I was picking up all these books and we were, I'm sure at the height of some Cold War sort of thing that the Russians are going to destroy us. We're going to destroy the Russians. There's nuclear power plants and they're leaking all over the place. Like I said, the cultural thing, pulls, in, certain aspects. But I also, one of my main places for inspiration were the magazine Smithsonian and then Smithsonian Air and Space, which are, I recognize now, a little bit more snooty magazines and definitely written more for retirees because of all the ads in the background. Take a cruise down the Rhine, buy an overpriced.
Totally grew up with those in the background.
But
so you're
and they were one of these things that an aunt of mine, a beloved aunt of mine, my Aunt Margie, gave to me as like a subscription. And I kind of turned my nose up for the longest time. Like, oh God, what are these, stuck up magazines? But as I read them, and I still read them to this day, at least Smithsonian, I don't get Air and Space as much anymore. They had these really obscure topics like the Smithsonian Museum, from which they come. So you had things that were just these crazy, wide-ranging, well-researched articles of people and history and things. And this one in our Air and Space was this real-life project, the Pluto Project. It was a real thing. And when that whole thing that's in the heart of the story, for those who haven't read it, is this madman has designed a ramjet and, a special type of basically early cruise missile that not only carries nuclear warheads, which is bad enough, but the way it sucks in air in the front, it sort of passes it over a nuclear reactor to heat up the air. So it's spewing out deadly radioactive waste in its wake. So it doesn't even need the warheads. It can just fly along. And this thing was called the Weapon from Hell. It was called the Flying Crowbar because it would basically fly over anywhere and destroy them. So this is a real thing. This is a real project that was actually being proposed and built back in the 60s. So I love weird details like that. I never wanted to just say, oh, it's the Doomsday device. I wanted something to base it on in terms of fact. Going back to Daredevil, all the stuff when we redid the costume, right? The biomimetic materials, the abalone shells for the arm guards, the synthetic weave of the fabric, all those sort of things. Those were all based on research into materials. So to me, this was like, wow, this is a really unique weapon, right? This is a really unique thing for this guy to be playing with. And so that was my drive to say, we're not just going to have a madman and a clearly off the hook killer type. He's got a really unique, hopefully, doomsday weapon, to play with as our MacGuffin to kick the story off and drive it through. So I still like that that weaving in, whether anybody appreciates that. Well, was there really something like that? And in fact, there was.
You don't want to know all the crazy projects. I mean, a lot of that stuff's declassified if you really want to know now.
Yeah. And now there's new stuff that won't be declassified for 25 more
years. So we're dead. So at least I'm dead. Exactly. All the stuff I want to know won't be released until I'm dead.
Yeah, I just appreciated, you always put some, you did your research, used realistic stuff. Again, back then, as a young man, I think you taught me a few things, so.
Well, thank you. And that was, I think, I guess the narrow sort of thing to walk is to make sure you don't put too much detail in that the story becomes about, wow, I guess Dan has a subscription to Smithsonian Magazine and actually making it serve the story and feel like, oh, that's your tickler, that's your springboard, and just enough that you need to serve the moment.
It set the tone and kept the pace really nice, I think.
Oh yeah.
Good. Yeah, we're talking about it. It's a pretty intimate story, and by that I mean it's a very tight collection of characters and some intensity between the reaction between her and the villain, especially.
Oh yeah, I thought the pacing was perfect. 48 pages. You could either, there's parts where the story could drag, or there's where you could think the pacing's too quick. Yeah, no, I thought it was perfect.
Yeah, it's good. The thing that looking at it back now, and it must have just been, I think, picking up from popular culture of the time. Malum, who's the villain again, his sidekick is just weird. Cassidy is this strange little fast talking type of character, and Larry just drew him in the weirdest way. That whole shorts and Hawaiian shirt thing he's got going on, that was Larry. Just, I don't know where he came up with that. Maybe that's why I wrote him that way. I was trying to think, because that would have been a plot and then probably a script. Because he's such a fast talking, strange character. I wonder if I wrote to the look of the character more than having developed him that way in the first place.
So I was going to say, so you think you were like, oh yeah, put him in a Hawaiian shirt, or was that little Larry just like, oh yeah?
I think that had to be Larry, and that's sort of the disconnect. Again, fault on me, but if the book stretched out for many months, as I think it did, that would have been probably the reason around it. But because it doesn't make sense logically in the way I think my brain would work to have this hyper-focused madman, and then he's got a sidekick who's dressed in Hawaiian shorts, Hawaiian t-shirt and shorts and a goofy tie and this kind of thing. And I don't see me putting those two elements together in quite that way with a story like that. But if that was the art, and it kind of came back, and now you're on a deadline to finish it, which I do remember when it finally showed up, and it was in Nell's office. Like, Nell was like, "This has got to be done like tomorrow or whatever." Not quite, but it suddenly went from this stretched out thing to this compressed thing. There wasn't an opportunity to kind of go back and say, that's not quite how I pictured it. So to my mind, that would have been, and I'm guessing, but I'm thinking that would have been a place where, okay, this is what the character looks like. You can't suddenly give him standard dialogue, or you can't give him erudite dialogue. That makes no sense for the character. But this kind of free-form character, let's make him fast-talking, let's make him whatever. And so that's where the weirdness of comics collaboration comes to play. Because sometimes you get to a scene that you think you're going to write so much for, and then you turn the page and you realize the artist has delivered on everything, so all you need is one word. Or sometimes, the visual is, that's not how I pictured it, and I got to figure out some other way so it fits the moment.
I mean, is there some of the danger there with, the Punisher and Black Widow are already pre-existing characters, so you kind of have an idea there. You create the villain, so it's like, I want to create a villain worthy for these two, but since it's my creation,
also has to be at the end of the story.
It has to be defeated, but also I don't want them to overshine the heroes, because it is my creation. And
How do you mean? Like the villain shouldn't be more powerful than the characters, or I don't want my character to stand out more? What do you
maybe a little of all of that, maybe.
Well, I don't think you can ever have a villain who's too strong. Right. If you turn the dial up, and we see this in movies all the time, weak villain means weak story, right? And so if you turn the dial up on the villain, and now as a writer or whatever, it's on you to turn the dial up on the protagonist or the heroes to make them meet the challenge of it. So I don't think your villain could ever be too strong. I mean, if you bring in, and ostensibly you could make it work, but you'd be a fool's errand to sort of Galactus versus Daredevil, right? An interesting story. If there, what if I should have pitched that one? But that's you're way out of whack. But I think your villain character needs to be strong because it makes the hero step up. It raises the stakes, and I think you always have to bring everything to the table, because as far as I'm concerned, it may be your last chance at the table. Mm-hmm. I think I mentioned before, when I was an editor, especially, I would have a lot of people come and pitch things. And one guy I remember specifically coming in and saying, well, I'm going to give you this, like 50% here. But when I get my own stuff, I'm going to deliver 100%, right? I'm going to really go to town on the characters and the story. That's where I'm really going to do it. And it's like, dude, do what you want, but you may never get another chance. This may be your only chance to do something. So deliver 100% now, and your chances of getting something again are a lot better. You do 50% effort, or 50% of a character, or 50% then. And if you've got nothing else in your quiver, if you're worried that you're going to do your best ideas now and you have no other ideas to play with, well, then that's the way things played out. But at least you brought it all there. You put it all on the page or on the screen or whatever. So I think my problem was I'm always coming up with these characters who are kind of meaty and interesting, at least to me, and then I kill them off.
It's comics, though. Is anyone ever truly dead?
Well, that's true too. It's sort of, but you're not necessarily going to come back to that guy, or even set it up in a way that you're going to come back to it in a way.
I appreciate that. If you have no plans, get them out of there.
Get them out of there. Okay, yeah, I guess I could, if I decided to come back and if I had gotten that Black Widow miniseries or something, then I could have found out that, he landed, in a field somewhere on top of a haystack. And
I mean, it built a sense of suspense, because it's always like, I don't know, is old Hang 'em High Chichester going to kill this guy at the end of this issue or not? I don't know.
I don't know. It seems like there never was, because you probably knew I was going to. Look, he set up all these characters and he killed them. So I guess it was like my trying to make the story neat and contained.
It's a little off topic, but I was in a discussion with some of my other co-hosts, Will and Matt Lilith. We had an editorial question. We were talking about the Marvel annuals over the years and stuff. And there were some people who got annuals and some books that didn't. How did you make that decision? Was that just purely a numbers? Who sold more? Who got an annual?
The annuals, I would say most and different editorial offices ran in different ways. But the annuals, I would say as much as anything, were probably driven by relationships between editors and creative folks, as much as anything else. And to some degree, some of the annuals were also driven by scheduling and in-office nepotism in a way. A lot of times you would see other editors or assistant editors or such show up in those credits. And they were talented people, so it's not like you're pulling in somebody who doesn't have the ability to tell a story from a writing point of view. But the annual would come up. I didn't schedule it. I didn't think about it. I need the story by next week. Phil, can you do it for me? And yeah, sure, I can do it for you. Absolutely. And so there was a little bit of that, and or again, pre-existing relationships, right? I worked on a lot of Punisher and Captain America annuals, and I had relationships with those editors or those offices or those characters, so I was an easy get, and I need to get this done. It needs to be consistent with the character. It needs not to break some rules. Dan is going to do it. Chuck is going to do it because they have whatever familiarity with a character. So I think that was probably as much a cycle as anything. And then if you had an annual that was tying into other things, maybe it was going across several annuals that had a storyline like the Von Strucker Gambit or something like that I think played out across the Cap annual and the Punisher annual and something else. Then you wanted somebody who was going to again coordinate well and not break the rules, or try to go off on their own way. So a little bit of that, I think. Not so much sales, I would think. I think the annual itself sold on the fact of it being an annual, but more what's it going to work.
So more relationships and schedule and stuff.
Relationships and schedule. Sometimes, you remember, you're an editorial office is pumping out 10, 12, 15 books a month, right? If not more. And so they're on a lot of pressure, right? Dealing with, you sort of like blanched a little bit when I said I was writing 4 books a month, right? But think about, I'm an editor, right? That's at least 4 people per book, right? I've got the writer, the penciler, the inker, 5, right? The colorist, the letterer. So I got 15 books times 5.
Wow.
People I'm dealing with. I mean, a letterer might be on multiple titles. Colorist might be on multiple titles, but there might be, pencilers, inkers. They're probably on one. And so you got a lot of people you're juggling. That stuff is coming in, not digitally. It's coming in FedEx packages. You're ripping them open. So a lot to coordinate. So if you could make your life a little bit easier by saying, Lilith, can you just take care of that story for me? That's a big headache off somebody's mind.
Wow. Editor, writer. No, that just blows my mind. Like all the comings and goings, I guess.
Yeah. And being an editor was a great training to be a writer. It sometimes got you in the sense like I could do that better, but mostly it was a sense of you're helping people tell their stories better, and ultimately, to my mind at least, that made me a better storyteller because I could be exposed to a lot of other ways of doing it. And I would want to raise my game, and I would want to be like Mark DeMatteis. I would want to be like Pat Mills, because I was helping them tell their story in some ways and seeing different ways of telling a story. I mean, I had a very, unique and lucky situation where, because I was an editor at Epic Comics, which is, largely forgotten, but Epic Comics was so weird and diverse. You had everything from a hardcore book like Martial Law, which was, if you've ever seen The Boys, go back and read Martial Law because they did it long time ago before The Boys, and better. Or I'm thinking like with Mark DeMatteis, Blood, which was a very lyrical tone poem almost to a somewhat vampiric world, and as much about mood and emotion as it was about a linear plot. So from my point of view, I had 2 completely different types of storytelling, but both hugely valid.
So what you're saying is it was good training, because it's like you learn stuff from the different writers, because could you go in and be like, oh, can you change this on, page 12? And they either be like, yeah, or they're like, no, this is why I'm doing this. And it's like, oh, okay, I didn't see that. Now I see, why you wrote this a certain way. And it kind of,
from my point of view.
Yeah.
And I had the, well, how shall I say it? the privilege and the curse of working on mostly creator-owned books at that point. So the creator-owned books were creator-owned. So I'm there to help guide your story, but hang on one second. I'm just going to stop this.
Okay.
Got a phone that's making noise in the background. So, sorry about that.
Okay.
So you're guiding their story, but you're not necessarily declaring, no, you're not going to do that. You're going to change this, which on the Marvel side was a whole different mindset. I remember doing an interview with Howard Mackey, who was an editor and writer and ghostwriter and such, well known for many, many things. And he was describing, like, from the Marvel point of view, right? It was like, I'm the editor. Like, here's your choice, make it. And, it was very much my way or the highway on certain things, right? Creatives had all this latitude, but at a certain point, if the editor said that's that, you're done. Here, it's not the same thing. Now, some things may not work completely, even in a creator-run story. So then you're still going back and you're saying, I get that it's your story. I get that you want it to go that way, but you need to step away from the ownership of it and think about it in a different way. So I had to play games like that for myself, or sometimes go to Archie Goodwin, who was my boss and the editor-in-chief of Epic Comics, who everybody respected, and say to Archie, I need your support here, right? Because Creator X is holding a line on this, and I just think from a purely editorial point of view, this doesn't make any sense. And then I'd see how he would deal with those people. And because he was Archie, people might just listen because it was Archie, but if he agreed with me, then that was validation I was on the right track. If he said, no, you're off, then that was something else I would learn, right? And then I'd learn something else as an editor. And then everything I would learn as an editor, again, I would ultimately apply as a writer.
It almost seems harder to be an editor than a writer, because it's like you're kind of like tweaking other people's art.
And story, right?
Yeah.
It's a different responsibility. From my point of view, again, where I was coming from, I was helping them tell their story, and the range and the variety of things within Epic was a good thing. They were not the best sellers and they were not the most well-known titles, but I got exposure to a lot of different genres and approaches to things that would than just another superhero story. Not that superhero stories don't go in many different ways; they do. But you had things that were weird cosmic comedies and and as I said, beautiful tone poems and over the top deconstructions of superheroes and huge range of things. But I often felt for a long time, felt I was a better editor than I was a writer, because I could separate myself and see the problems and the points that needed to kind of come together. But you're juggling a lot more, right? When you're a writer, you're responsible for yourself. And when you're an editor, how do you crowbar those pages out of that artist? It's like, we're 5 weeks behind schedule. Think you could send me a page, and so that's tricky. And especially on creator-owned books, right? What do you do? Except make them say you're doing this to yourself, right? You're hurting yourself at this point.
Do you have any thoughts, Lilith? I feel like I'm editing you out of this conversation.
No, you're perfectly fine. I asked all the questions that I needed. I can't recommend this story enough. I think you definitely need it in your collection. So
thank you, Lilith. Yeah, it's a good little.
And if you can find that original format, I'm telling you, it is so worth hunting down that original format. It really changes the story, I think.
I think you're absolutely right. That's a great point. Unfortunately, they're not handing it out at the theaters, but if you do, even if you order the large popcorn, you won't get it for free. But
you gotta know your local this is where the relationships with your local comic book shop guy comes in handy.
Truly.
And I mean, the great visuals too, the art. I mean, I'm surprised they're not slapping some of these visuals on like t-shirts or something.
Oh yeah, the cover itself is awesome.
Yeah.
And then Larry's, he's got several big pinups, throughout there, with the two of them. There's really, really strong visualizations. So, but the cover is itself really pretty extraordinary.
Oh yeah, definitely. All right. So is that all the questions we had for him, Lilith? All right.
My two dogs are arguing over a biscuit, so don't mind me.
What? All right. So before we get to the plugs, I figure I'll give everyone, including Mr. Chichester's homework for next month.
What's my homework?
Well, I figured I would want to do another team up this time. I want to talk your Daredevil and Batman.
Oh, okay.
We could get some Batman talking here. Yeah.
All right. Some good history behind that one. Great. Good stuff.
Talk about those Marvel DC team ups. Yeah. All right. So, let the kids know where they can find you. Tell us about the newsletter. And don't you have an appearance? What is that, in 2 weeks? I
do. 2 weeks' time, which is July 31st and August 1st. I will be at the Terrificon comic convention in Mohegan Suns Casino in Connecticut. So if you're in the Northeast, drop by. I'll be there all day, both days at booth N14. I now know exactly where I'll be, across from Lee Weeks, eyeballing him, and the whole time. And so, wherever the creator section is. So drop by, get your autographs, ask your questions, mispronounce my name, all good things like that. And then my regular newsletter is available at storymaze.substack.com. So check it out, and if you enjoy it, subscribe.
That's right, kids. Him and Lee will both be there, so get your Daredevil 300 sign. And remember, make sure you ask Lee, why did Daredevil forgive the Kingpin?
Exactly. Yes, I'm sure he'd enjoy that question many times over.
You'll be getting the stink eye over that.
And he'll just say, turn around and go ask him.
All right, so kids. If you have questions for Mr. Chichester, email us capesandlunatics@gmail.com or call the voicemail 614-382-2737. That's 614-38-CAPES. And you can find all of our information, social medias, links to this YouTube channel. You can watch the video of this. I know everything. Links to everything's at Linktree, linktr.ee/capesandlunatics. And make sure you support the Southgate Media Group by using the link for Amazon. Again, it's in the show notes. So, hey, go buy Punisher Black Widow Spinning Doomsday's Web on Amazon and use the link. So, make everyone here happy. All right.
Exactly. All right, guys. Thanks again.
Thank you, sir. Always a great time.